The stars burned cold and distant as Commander Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of the Celestial Dawn and watched another world die. The planet below had been home to 6 billion Centauri people just 3 days ago. Now it was nothing but ash and twisted metal. The Velcrin swarm had come and gone like locusts, leaving only death in their wake. Jake pressed his hand against the cold glass and felt the weight of failure settle deeper into his bones. This was the 12th world to fall in 6 months. 12 civilizations erased from existence while the Galactic Coalition debated and argued and accomplished nothing. He turned away from the window and walked through the corridors of the massive flagship. Alien crew members from 40 different species moved past him with faces drawn and eyes hollow. They all knew the truth, even if their leaders refused to speak it aloud. They were losing this war. The Coalition had ruled 3 spiral arms of the galaxy for 2,000 years. 47 species living in perfect harmony and peace. War was something from ancient history, a barbaric practice that civilized beings had moved beyond. Their military existed only for ceremony and peacekeeping. When the Velcrin emerged from dark space 6 months ago, the Coalition had been confident. They had numbers and technology and the moral superiority of a peaceful civilization. They had everything except the one thing that mattered. They had forgotten how to fight. Dr. Lisa Palmer found Jake in the mess hall staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. She sat down across from him without asking permission. Lisa was a xenobiologist from Earth, assigned to study the Velcrin and find their weaknesses. So far she had found nothing but more reasons to be afraid. The Velcrin were not just an enemy. They were a force of nature, efficient and merciless and unstoppable. Jake looked up at her and saw his own exhaustion reflected in her eyes. They had both been with the Coalition fleet since the beginning of this nightmare. They had both watched the admirals and generals make the same mistakes over and over again. Retreat when they should attack. Negotiate when they should fight. Preserve their precious ships while worlds burned behind them. Lisa spoke first, and her voice was barely above a whisper. The Velcrin are heading toward human space. The projections show they will reach our outer colonies in 3 months. Maybe less. The Coalition Council is meeting today to discuss the defense strategy. Jake already knew what that meant. He had sat through enough council meetings to understand how these elder species thought. Earth and its 12 colony worlds were at the edge of Coalition space. Humanity had only been part of the galactic community for 70 years. They were junior members with little political power and even less respect. When the Council talked about preserving Coalition strength, they meant preserving the core worlds. The worlds that mattered. Human space was expendable. The Battle of Crimson Nebula happened 3 days later, and it was worse than anyone had imagined. Admiral Kethros commanded the Coalition Third Fleet, 15 massive battleships with crews numbering in the hundreds of thousands. The Velcrin brought 30 ships, smaller and uglier, but built for war in a way the Coalition vessels never were. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it was over, all 15 Coalition battleships were destroyed or disabled. The Velcrin lost 2 ships. Jake was on the Celestial Dawn when the Velcrin tore through its hull like paper. He remembered the screaming and the fire and the horrible sound of metal being ripped apart. He remembered running through corridors that twisted and buckled, stepping over bodies of crew members he had eaten breakfast with that morning. He made it to an escape pod with 11 other survivors. They launched into space and watched their ship break into 3 pieces and tumble into the nebula's gravity well. They floated in that pod for 16 hours before a rescue ship found them. In those 16 hours, Jake had time to think about everything he had seen. The Coalition fought like they were still at peace. They positioned their ships in neat formations that looked impressive, but created massive vulnerabilities. They retreated at the first sign of real danger. They valued the lives of their crew members so highly that they refused to take necessary risks. It was all very civilized and noble and completely useless. Admiral Kethros survived the battle by surrendering 3 entire sectors to the Velcrin without firing another shot. He called it a tactical withdrawal. He called it preserving Coalition forces for a future counterattack. Jake called it cowardice, but no one asked for his opinion. He was just a human officer from a junior species. What did he know about galactic warfare? Earth received the news of the Crimson Nebula disaster, while Jake was still floating in space. Ambassador Daniel Price stood before the Galactic Council and listened to them debate the defense of human space. The debate lasted 6 hours. Species after species stood and explained why defending the outer colonies was not strategically sound, why human space was too far from the core worlds to protect properly, why it made more sense to evacuate humanity and resettle them deeper in coalition territory. Ambassador Price listened to all of it with a face like stone. When they finally allowed him to speak, he kept it simple. Humanity will defend its own territory, with or without coalition support. We will not abandon our worlds. We will not run. If the Velcrin want our colonies, they will have to take them over our dead bodies. The council chamber fell silent. Then the laughing started. Not cruel laughter exactly, but the kind of laughter that comes from beings who think they are listening to a child pretend to be brave. The Zentari counselor spoke for all of them. With respect, Ambassador Price, humanity has never fought an interstellar war. You do not understand what you are facing. The Velcrin will destroy your fleets and consume your worlds. Evacuation is the only logical choice. Daniel Price looked at the counselor and something flickered behind his eyes. Something old and dangerous that made a few of the closer council members lean back in their seats. You are right that we have never fought an interstellar war. But you are wrong about what that means. Earth has known war for its entire history. We have fought each other in every way imaginable. We have studied conflict and strategy and violence for 10,000 years. We stopped fighting each other 70 years ago when we joined the coalition. But we never forgot how. He paused and looked around the chamber at faces representing 47 species. Most of you have known peace for thousands of years. You have forgotten what war actually means, what it costs, what it demands. We have not forgotten. We remember. And now we will show you what humans do when faced with extinction. We do not debate. We do not retreat. We fight. The council dismissed his words as bravado. They authorized humanitarian aid for the eventual evacuation of human space. They offered thoughts and prayers. They did everything except what actually needed to be done. Ambassador Price left the chamber and sent a single message back to Earth. We are on our own. Prepare for war. Jake Morrison made it back to Earth 3 days later. He went straight to military headquarters and found controlled chaos. Every available ship was being pulled into service. Civilian transports were being retrofitted with weapons. The old warships from before humanity joined the coalition, the ones that had been mothballed and put in museums, were being dragged out of storage and made ready for combat. Earth was mobilizing for war, and they were doing it without permission from anyone. General Frank Carter met with Jake in a briefing room deep underground. The general was older than Jake by 30 years, with gray hair and scars from the Mars Rebellion decades ago. He had fought in the last war humanity waged against itself. He understood things the coalition had forgotten. The general spread star charts across the table and began explaining the defense plan. We are going to show them something they have never seen before. The coalition fights to minimize casualties. They fight to preserve their forces. They fight like they are still at peace. We are going to fight like we are trying to survive, because we are. Jake looked at the charts and saw the outer colonies marked in red. New Haven would be the first to face the Velcrin. Captain Henry Walsh was already there with whatever ships could reach him in time. The plan was insane. It was ruthless. It violated every rule of civilized warfare the coalition held sacred. It was also the only chance they had. Lisa Palmer joined them in the briefing room with her research files. She had been studying Velcrin biology and behavior since the first attack. Her findings were not encouraging, but they were useful. The Velcrin operated as a hive mind with command nodes directing vast numbers of drones. Kill enough drones and they just made more. But disrupt the command nodes and the entire system faltered. It was a weakness, but exploiting it would require tactics the coalition would never approve. General Carter listened to her report and nodded slowly. Then we do not ask for approval. We do what needs to be done. The coalition wants to preserve life and maintain moral superiority. We want to survive. Those are not the same thing. Jake understood then what was about to happen. Earth was going to war, not the kind of war the coalition understood. The real kind, the brutal kind. The kind where you used every advantage and paid every price and did things that peaceful species found horrifying. Humanity was going to unleash everything it had learned in 10,000 years of killing each other. The galaxy. The colony world of New Haven received its death sentence on a Tuesday morning. Captain Henry Walsh stood in the command center of Defender Station and watched the long-range sensors light up with hostile contacts. 300 Velcrin ships were coming, and he had exactly 48 hours before they arrived. His defense force consisted of 12 aging cruisers and a handful of patrol boats. The math was simple and brutal. New Haven could not be defended. Walsh was a military man who had served Earth for 30 years before humanity ever joined the Coalition. He had fought pirates in the outer colonies and put down rebellions on Mars. He knew how to make hard choices, and this one was not even difficult. He opened a channel to the planet below and gave the evacuation order. Every civilian transport on New Haven launched within 6 hours. Women and children went first, then the elderly, then everyone else who could fit on a ship. By the time the Velcrin arrived, New Haven would be empty. The Coalition observers on Defender Station protested immediately. A Zentari colonel named Vexen demanded to know why Walsh was not preparing defensive positions, why he was not requesting reinforcements, why he was abandoning a perfectly defensible colony world without firing a single shot. Walsh looked at the alien officer and smiled a smile that had no warmth in it. Watch and learn. The evacuation took 40 hours. Walsh used every minute of that time to prepare his surprise. New Haven had 3 nuclear power plants and enough weapons-grade material to build 200 warheads. The colony also had extensive mining operations that used high-yield explosives. Walsh's engineers worked around the clock, placing charges in strategic locations across the entire planet. When they were done, New Haven was a bomb waiting for someone to press the button. The last transport lifted off 6 hours before the Velcrin arrived. Walsh sent his defense fleet away with them. Colonel Vexen protested again and called it cowardice. Walsh ignored him and stayed behind on Defender Station with a skeleton crew of volunteers. They watched the Velcrin fleet enter orbit and begin landing troops. The alien invaders found empty cities and silent streets. They began harvesting resources immediately, stripping the planet of anything useful. Walsh waited until the Velcrin had committed most of their ground forces to the surface. He waited until their ships were in low orbit, close enough to be caught in the blast. Then he pressed the button. 200 nuclear warheads detonated simultaneously across New Haven. The explosions triggered secondary detonations in the mining facilities. The planet's crust cracked and atmosphere ignited. The Velcrin ships in low orbit were consumed by the fireball. Those farther out were hit by debris moving at orbital velocity. When the fire finally died, New Haven was gone. So were 240 Velcrin ships and an estimated 3 million drones. Walsh had destroyed an entire invasion force without losing a single human life. The Coalition observers on Defender Station stood in shocked silence. Colonel Vexen finally found his voice. "You destroyed an entire planet. That is barbaric. That is insane." Walsh looked at him with tired eyes. "That is survival. The Velcrin came to take our world. I made sure there was nothing left to take. They learned a lesson today. Human territory is not free. Every meter of space will cost them. Every world will bleed them. We will make them pay for everything they take." The news of New Haven spread through Coalition space like wildfire. Earth's military command had shown the galaxy something it had not seen in thousands of years. Humanity was willing to destroy their own worlds rather than let them fall to the enemy. The Coalition Council called it a war crime. General Frank Carter called it effective. The Velcrin called it unexpected and adjusted their calculations accordingly. 3 weeks later, the Velcrin came for the colony world of Fremont. This time they brought 800 ships and came ready for human tricks. Admiral Victoria Hayes commanded the defense fleet, 37 ships against 800. The Coalition observers predicted complete annihilation within hours. Hayes had other plans. She did not meet the Velcrin in open space where their numbers would crush her. Instead, she divided her fleet into 6 small groups and scattered them throughout the Fremont system. When the Velcrin entered, they found no organized opposition, just small clusters of ships that appeared on their sensors and vanished before they could respond. Hayes had studied Earth's ancient naval warfare. Back when humans fought on water in wooden ships, she was using guerrilla tactics in space. The Velcrin fleet pressed forward toward Fremont, expecting resistance. Instead, they found constant harassment. Human ships would appear, launch missiles, and jump away before the enemy could return fire. They would attack supply lines and target isolated ships. They would strike from 6 different directions and force the Velcrin to split their forces to respond. It was death by 1,000 cuts, and the Velcrin had no answer for it. Commander Sophie Grant led one of those strike groups in a modified destroyer called the Shadow. Her ship was fast and carried enough missiles to cripple a cruiser. Her crew had trained for this kind of hit-and-run combat for years. They would drop out of hyperspace behind a Velcrin formation, fire everything they had, and disappear before the enemy even knew they were under attack. In 3 weeks of running battles, the Shadow destroyed 18 enemy ships without taking a single hit. The Velkrin tried to adapt. They tightened their formations and increased patrols. They set traps and ambushes. Nothing worked. Human ships refused to fight fair. They refused to engage in pitched battles where the enemy's numbers mattered. They were like ghosts, appearing and disappearing, always attacking where the Velkrin were weakest. It was frustrating and demoralizing, and most importantly, it was working. Lieutenant Kyle Preston commanded a Marine unit aboard one of Hayes's cruisers. When the Velkrin tried to land ground forces on Fremont, Preston's Marines were waiting. They had studied the enemy's tactics and biology. They knew the drones operated on a hive mind and lost effectiveness when separated from their command nodes. So Preston's Marines used urban warfare tactics, breaking the enemy into small groups and eliminating them systematically. The fighting on Fremont's surface was brutal. The Velkrin had superior numbers, but the human Marines had something more valuable. They had experience fighting thinking opponents in complex environments. Every street became a kill zone. Every building became a fortress. The Marines used the terrain and their knowledge of human architecture to devastating effect. Velkrin drones would enter a building and never come out. They would chase a Marine squad into an alley and walk into an ambush. The city became a graveyard for the invaders. Dr. Lisa Palmer watched the Battle of Fremont from Earth and analyzed every piece of data. She noticed something crucial. When human forces destroyed multiple Velkrin ships in quick succession, the remaining ships showed decreased coordination. The hive mind was struggling to compensate for rapid losses. She sent her findings to Admiral Hayes immediately. Hayes adjusted her tactics and began coordinating her strike groups to hit multiple targets simultaneously. The results were dramatic. When 6 human ships attacked 6 different Velkrin formations at exactly the same moment, the enemy fleet staggered. Their response time increased. Their formations broke apart. Hayes pressed her advantage and the running battles became massacres. Velkrin ships tried to retreat, but the humans pursued them relentlessly. There was no mercy and no quarter given. The Battle of Fremont lasted 3 weeks. When it finally ended, the Velkrin had lost 304 ships. Admiral Hayes lost 9 ships and 40,000 personnel. By any measure, it was a lopsided victory. But more importantly, it was the first time the Velkrin had retreated. They had come to take Fremont and failed. They had faced determined human resistance and been turned back. The galaxy took notice. The coalition observers who had predicted human annihilation now watched in stunned silence. A junior species with no experience in interstellar warfare was achieving what the coalition's best commanders could not. They were actually winning battles against the Velkrin. The question everyone asked was simple: how? General Carter provided the answer during a briefing to coalition military leaders. We are not smarter than you. We do not have better technology. What we have is experience. For 10,000 years, humans fought each other. We have studied war in every form imaginable. We know tactics and strategy that your species abandoned millennia ago. We know how to fight dirty and win ugly and pay the costs that victory demands. He paused and looked around the room at alien faces struggling to understand. Your military is designed for peacekeeping and ceremonial duty. Ours is designed for war. You train your soldiers to minimize casualties and preserve equipment. We train our soldiers to achieve objectives regardless of cost. You retreat when the odds are against you. We attack anyway because sometimes the odds are wrong. That is the difference. A Helkin admiral named Torvin spoke up. But the casualties you accept are horrifying. Your Admiral Hayes lost 40,000 personnel at Fremont. How can you justify such losses? General Carter's expression hardened. Fremont has a population of 200 million. If we had lost that battle, all of them would be dead or enslaved. 40,000 soldiers died so that 200 million civilians could live. That is not a difficult equation. That is 8 months into the war, and the galaxy looked different than it had before. The front lines had stabilized across 70 star systems. The Velkrin advance had been stopped but not broken. Both sides settled into a grinding war of attrition, where every system and every planet was paid for in blood. Captain Jake Morrison commanded a battleship now, a massive vessel called the Relentless that served as the flagship for a mixed human-alien battle group. His crew included Zentari warriors, Osari engineers, Helkin navigators, and human soldiers. It was an experiment in cooperation that nobody thought would work. The first month had been difficult. The alien crew members did not trust human leadership and human methods. They thought humans were reckless and brutal. They questioned every order that involved risk. They wanted to fight the way the coalition had always fought, with caution and preservation of forces. Jake had to show them a different way. The Battle of Anchor Point changed everything. Jake's battle group was defending a supply station when the Velcrin attacked with overwhelming force. A Zentari destroyer named the Stormwind took critical damage and began to drift toward a gravity well. Standard coalition procedure was to evacuate the crew and let the ship go. Jake had other ideas. He ordered the Relentless to position itself between the Stormwind and the Velcrin fleet. His ship took a beating while engineers worked to repair the destroyer's engines. They saved the Stormwind, but the Relentless suffered heavy damage. After the battle, the Zentari tactical officer approached Jake on the bridge. Her name was Saren, and she had served in the Coalition fleet for 20 years. She looked at Jake with something like understanding in her alien eyes. You risked your ship and your crew to save ours. This is not efficient. This is not logical. But I begin to understand why humans win battles. You fight for each other, not just for objectives. Jake nodded slowly. War is not just about strategy and firepower. It is about the bonds between soldiers. When your people know you will risk everything for them, they will do the same for you. That is what the Coalition forgot. That is what makes humans different. From that day forward, the crew of the Relentless fought as a single unit. The aliens learned human tactics and humans learned to work with alien technology. They became something new, a hybrid force that combined the best of both approaches. Other mixed crews watched and learned. The transformation was spreading through the entire Coalition military. Meanwhile, Commander Sophie Grant led Ghost Protocol deep into enemy territory on a mission that everyone said was impossible. Her team of 12 operators had one objective: capture a living Velcrin command node for study. Dr. Lisa Palmer needed one to understand how the hive mind worked and how to disrupt it. Getting one meant penetrating the heart of Velcrin space and stealing something the enemy would die to protect. Grant's team used a captured Velcrin bioship to infiltrate enemy lines. The ship still smelled like the creatures who had piloted it, and the organic controls were disturbing to touch. But it worked. They slipped past Velcrin patrols and sensor nets, just another ship in the swarm. For 2 weeks they observed and planned and waited for the right moment. The target was a research facility on an occupied world that had once been home to the Osari people. The Velcrin were using Osari scientists as slaves, forcing them to develop new weapons and technology. Grant's team had 2 objectives now: get the command node and rescue any scientists they could find. It was ambitious and dangerous and exactly the kind of mission humans excelled at. They struck at midnight local time when the facility was at minimum alert. Grant's operators moved like shadows through the complex, killing silently and efficiently. They reached the command node chamber and found it guarded by 50 Velcrin warriors. The firefight lasted 4 minutes and cost them 3 operators, but they got the node and 17 scientists out. They fought their way back to the bioship with half the Velcrin fleet chasing them. The escape was a nightmare of close calls and desperate maneuvers. They jumped through 3 different systems with enemy ships right behind them. Finally, they made it back to Coalition space with the node intact and the scientists alive. 3 of Grant's team did not make it home. She wrote their families personally and told them their sacrifice had given humanity a weapon that could end the war. Dr. Lisa Palmer began studying the captured node immediately. What she found changed everything. The Velcrin were not a natural species. They had been created as a biological weapon by a civilization that destroyed itself thousands of years ago. The hive mind was artificial, programmed with a single directive: consume and conquer. The drones were not evil. They were slaves to programming they could not resist. Palmer spent weeks analyzing the node's structure and finally made a breakthrough. She could create a virus that targeted the neural network connecting all Velcrin drones. It would disrupt their coordination and potentially free them from the hive mind's control. But there was a problem. The virus would be lethal to billions of drones. It was a weapon of mass destruction on a scale humanity had never used before. General Frank Carter faced the hardest decision of his career: use the weapon and potentially end the war but kill billions of beings, or continue fighting conventionally and watch millions more coalition citizens die. He consulted with Admiral Victoria Hayes and Ambassador Daniel Price. They consulted with coalition leaders. Everyone understood the weight of the choice. The debate raged for 3 weeks. Some argued that using such a weapon made humanity no better than the Velkrin. Others pointed out that the Velkrin had already killed hundreds of millions and would kill billions more if not stopped. The moral philosophers debated while the war continued. Then the Velkrin launched a massive offensive and overran 2 sectors. 6 million civilians died in 48 hours. The debate ended. Ambassador Daniel Price addressed the Galactic Council one final time before deployment. He spoke about the cost of war and the burden of command. He talked about humanity's own history of terrible weapons and the responsibility that came with using them. His voice was heavy with the weight of billions of lives. We do not use this weapon because we are cruel. We use it because we must. The alternative is to watch more innocents die while we preserve our moral purity. That is a luxury we cannot afford. We will bear this sin so that others may live. The weapon was deployed across 17 Velkrin hive nodes simultaneously. Dr. Palmer watched the data streams and felt sick as the numbers climbed. 3 billion drones died in 72 hours. Their neural networks simply shut down and they collapsed where they stood. It was the single largest loss of life from a single weapon in galactic history. Palmer would spend the rest of her life trying to forgive herself, but the weapon worked. The Velkrin advance collapsed immediately. Entire fleets went dormant without command nodes to direct them. The hive mind fragmented into isolated pockets that could not coordinate attacks. For the first time since the war began, the coalition could go on the offensive. General Carter wasted no time. He launched Operation Endgame within days. Lieutenant Kyle Preston's Marines were part of the first wave. They landed on 36 worlds that the Velkrin had occupied and found confused drones, wandering without purpose. Some fought. Most simply stood and waited for orders that would never come. It was sad in a way that Preston had not expected. These creatures were victims too, slaves to programming that made them into monsters. The coalition forces pushed forward on a 1,000-light-year front. Jake Morrison's battle group led the northern advance, fighting through the heaviest concentrations of Velkrin forces. The Relentless took part in 30 battles in 4 months. The ship was scarred and battered, but it kept fighting. Jake's mixed crew had become legendary. They were proof that humans and aliens could work together, that the old ways and new ways could combine into something stronger than either alone. Admiral Victoria Hayes commanded the Southern Front and paid the highest price. Her fleet fought through to the Velkrin production facilities deep in enemy space. The battle lasted 6 days and cost her 60% of her ships. Hayes's flagship was destroyed on the final day, but not before she sent a message to General Carter. "The path is clear, finish it." She died a hero, and humanity mourned her loss. Commander Sophie Grant volunteered for one more mission. She and Dr. Palmer would lead a team to the Velkrin Central Core, the massive biostructure that controlled all remaining hive nodes. If they could reach it, Palmer believed she could reprogram the entire Velkrin species, give them free will, make them individuals instead of drones. It was a long shot, but it was better than genocide. Jake Morrison's battle group was assigned to escort them. His ship was barely operational after months of constant combat, but he accepted the mission without hesitation. They would fight through 30 layers of defenses to reach the core. Most of his ships would not make it. Most of his crew would die. But this was what humans did. They took the impossible missions and paid whatever price victory demanded. The journey to the core took 3 weeks of constant fighting. Jake lost ships one by one to enemy fire. The Zentari cruiser Stormwind, the same ship he had saved at Anchor Point, sacrificed itself to take out a Velkrin fortress. The Helkin destroyer Morningstar crashed into an enemy bioship to clear a path. The Osari Cian. The silence after the war was harder to accept than the noise of battle had been. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Relentless and watched repair crews work on the damaged hull through the viewport. The ship had barely survived the final mission, and neither had most of the crew. Out of 800 personnel who had started the war, only 300 remained. The rest were dead or so badly wounded they would never serve again. Every ship in the fleet had similar numbers. Every family on Earth had lost someone. The Velkrin were scattered across 100 worlds, no longer a unified threat, but millions of confused individuals trying to understand what had happened to them. Some were hostile and had to be contained. Most were simply lost. The coalition established relief centers and tried to help them adjust to freedom. Dr. Lisa Palmer, worked 18-hour days trying to teach former drones how to think for themselves. It was slow and painful work that would take decades. Earth had lost 41% of its population during the war. Not just soldiers, but civilians caught in battles and bombings. The 12 colony worlds had suffered even worse. New Haven was gone completely, and 3 other colonies were so damaged they might never recover. The numbers were staggering, and the grief was universal. Every human alive had lost family or friends. The victory felt hollow when weighed against such loss. General Frank Carter stood before the Galactic Council and received the highest honors they could bestow. He accepted them with a face carved from stone and eyes that had seen too much death. The elder species praised humanity's courage and sacrifice. They thanked Earth for saving the galaxy. Carter listened to all of it and said nothing until they finished. Then he spoke, and his words carried the weight of billions of dead. "You honor us now, but where were you when we needed you? Where were you when New Haven burned? Where were you when Admiral Hayes died buying you time? Where were you when human soldiers paid for every meter of space with their blood? You were debating and withdrawing and preserving your forces while we were dying. Do not thank us. Thank the 41 billion humans who are not here to receive your gratitude." The council chamber fell silent. The Zentari counselor who had once laughed at Ambassador Price now looked at General Carter with shame in his eyes. "You are right to rebuke us. We failed you. We failed ourselves. We forgot what survival costs, and you paid that price for all of us. How can we ever repay this debt?" Carter's expression softened slightly. "You can remember. Remember what happens when civilized species forget how to fight. Remember that peace must be defended or it will be taken away. Remember that sometimes the costs are terrible but must be paid anyway. And most importantly, train your soldiers the way we trained ours. Because this will not be the last threat the galaxy faces." The Coalition agreed to sweeping military reforms. Human officers would train Coalition forces permanently. Earth's tactical academies would become the standard for all species. The doctrine of minimal casualties was replaced with the doctrine of achieving objectives. It was a fundamental shift in how the galaxy approached warfare, and it happened because humanity had shown them there was no other way to survive. Commander Sophie, Grant returned to Earth a hero, but she did not feel like one. She had led missions that killed thousands of enemy combatants. She had made decisions that cost good soldiers their lives. The medals and ceremonies felt wrong somehow. She visited the families of the operators who had died under her command, and found no comfort in their gratitude. They had lost sons and daughters and brothers and sisters because of orders she had given. Lieutenant Kyle Preston was promoted to colonel and given command of the new Coalition Marine Corps. His job was to teach aliens how to fight on the ground the way humans did. It was strange work because most species had no concept of urban warfare or guerrilla tactics. They had to learn from scratch how to use terrain and psychology and brutal close-quarters combat. Preston was patient with them, but he never let them forget the lessons. Soldiers who forget how to fight become casualties. The Awakened, as the former Velcrin now called themselves, became the galaxy's newest problem. Most wanted peace and integration, but some could not let go of their programming. Small groups launched attacks on Coalition worlds. They were not organized or effective, but they were persistent. Jake Morrison's battle group spent months hunting down these remnants, and each battle felt wrong. They were fighting individuals now, not a hive mind. It was harder to justify killing beings who were just confused and angry. Dr. Lisa Palmer made another breakthrough 6 months after the war ended. She discovered that some Awakened retained fragments of memories from the species the Velcrin had consumed. Osari scientists who had been turned into drones still had Osari knowledge buried in their altered genetics. It was possible to recover some of what had been lost. Palmer began the painstaking work of helping Awaken reconnect with their original identities. It gave hope to species who had thought their people lost forever. Ambassador Daniel Price negotiated Earth's new position in the Galactic Council. Humanity was elevated to senior membership and given permanent command positions in the unified military. It was unprecedented for such a young species, but no one argued. Earth had earned it in blood. Price used this new influence carefully. He pushed for better military preparedness, but also for aid to war-torn worlds. He wanted the galaxy to remember both the cost of being unprepared and the responsibility that came with power. The first anniversary of the war's end was marked with ceremonies across Coalition space. Every world held memorials for their dead. On Earth, they built a wall with 41 billion names carved in stone. It stretched for miles and took a year to complete. At the center was a simple inscription that Ambassador Price had written himself. They were relentless. They were human. They saved us all. Jake Morrison attended the Earth ceremony with what remained of his crew. Saren the Zentari tactical officer stood beside him, along with a dozen other aliens who had served on the Relentless. They had become family during the war, and the bonds remained strong. Saren looked at the endless wall of names and spoke quietly. I used to think humans were reckless and brutal. Now I understand you were simply willing to do what we could not. You paid a price we refused to accept. I am sorry it took so long for us to learn. Jake put his hand on her shoulder in a gesture that crossed species barriers. You learned. That is what matters. The next time the galaxy faces a threat, you will be ready. You will not have to watch us die alone. That is enough. The memorial ceremony ended and people dispersed slowly, reluctant to leave. Jake walked along the wall and found names he recognized. Marines he had served with, engineers who had kept the Relentless running, young officers who had died in their first battles. Each name was a person with a story and a family. Each name represented a sacrifice made so that others could live. The weight of it was crushing. Commander Grant found him there hours later, still walking along the wall. She looked as tired as he felt. They stood together in silence for a while before she spoke. Do you think it was worth it? All those lives, all that death. Was saving the galaxy worth losing so much? Jake considered the question carefully. It is not about worth. It is about necessity. We did not have the luxury of choosing whether to fight. We could fight and maybe die, or not fight and definitely die. We chose to fight and some of us survived. That is all war ever is. A terrible choice between bad options. But yes, if you force me to answer, it was worth it. Because the alternative was extinction. Grant nodded slowly. I keep thinking about the weapon. The one that killed 3 billion Velcrin. Palmer and I carry that burden, and I do not know if we can ever put it down. How do you live with that? How do you justify killing so many? You do not justify it. You acknowledge it and you carry it and you make sure it meant something. Those 3 billion died so that trillions could live. It does not make it right, but it makes it necessary. That is the burden of command. Sometimes there are no good choices, only less terrible ones. We made the choice and now we live with it. The sun was setting over the memorial wall, casting long shadows across the names. Jake thought about everything that had happened since the Velcrin first appeared. The battles and the losses and the terrible decisions. He thought about Captain Walsh destroying New Haven and Admiral Hayes dying to clear a path. He thought about the 41 billion humans who would never see another sunset. The cost had been almost too much to bear, but humanity had survived. That had to count for something. General Carter issued new orders 3 months later. The coalition military would maintain a permanent rapid response force capable of deploying anywhere in the galaxy within days. Half of that force would be human-trained and human-led. The other half would be mixed species units following human tactical doctrine. The goal was simple. Never again would the galaxy be caught unprepared. Never again would peaceful civilizations face extinction because they had forgotten how to defend themselves. Jake Morrison was promoted to admiral and given command of this new rapid response fleet. His flagship was a newly constructed battleship that bore a familiar name, Relentless. The first ship had been decommissioned after the war, too damaged to repair. But the name lived on. It was a reminder of what humanity had accomplished. 5 years after the war ended and the galaxy had learned to breathe again, Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the new Relentless and watched his mixed-species crew work with practiced efficiency. They were on patrol along the frontier, the vast empty space between known civilization and whatever darkness lay beyond. It was quiet work most days, but necessary. The galaxy had learned its lesson about being unprepared. His tactical officer was still Saren, the Zentari who had served with him through the entire war. She had turned down promotions to stay with Jake and the Relentless. The bonds forged in combat were stronger than any career advancement. Beside her stood 3 human officers, 2 Asari engineers, and a Helkan navigator. They were a family now, this crew. They trusted each other with their lives because they had already done so 1,000 times. The sensor officer called out a contact and the bridge became alert. A small ship was broadcasting a distress signal from just beyond the frontier. Jake ordered them to investigate. As they approached, they found a vessel unlike anything in Coalition records. It was ancient and badly damaged. The hull was pitted with scars from weapons that had not existed in known space for millennia. Inside were 3 survivors from a species no one had ever seen before. The survivors called themselves the Torath, and their story was grim. They came from beyond the galactic rim, running from something they called the Devourers, a force even more terrible than the Velcrin had been. The Devourers had destroyed a dozen civilizations and were moving toward Coalition space. The Torath had been fleeing for years and were the last of their kind. They had come to warn the galaxy about what was coming. Jake listened to their story and felt ice form in his stomach. Another threat. Another war. The galaxy had barely recovered from the last one, and now something worse was approaching. He sent the Torath to Earth with a full report and requested orders. The response came from General Carter himself. "Bring your fleet home. We need to prepare." The Galactic Council received the news with fear and something close to panic. Many species wanted to flee deeper into the galaxy. Others suggested trying to negotiate with the Devourers. A few proposed building massive defensive stations and hoping the threat would pass them by. Jake attended the emergency session and watched history repeat itself. They had learned nothing from the Velcrin War except how to be afraid. Ambassador Daniel Price stood before the council, and his voice carried the weight of experience. "We have been through this before. Fear and debate will not save us. Preparation and strength will. We must mobilize now. We must train our forces and build our defenses and be ready to fight. The alternative is what happened 5 years ago. Except this time, we know better." The Zentari counselor agreed immediately. He had learned his lesson watching humanity bleed to save the galaxy. Other species followed his lead. The council voted to begin immediate military preparations. General Carter was given command of the defensive buildup. Earth's tactical doctrine became the official coalition standard. The galaxy was learning to be relentless. Commander Sophie Grant trained special operations teams from 40 different species. Her methods were brutal and demanding. Many candidates washed out in the first week. But those who made it through became the elite warriors the coalition needed. Grant taught them everything Ghost Protocol had learned during the war: how to infiltrate enemy territory, how to complete impossible missions, how to accept casualties and keep fighting. She was preparing them for a war that might be even worse than the last one. Colonel Kyle Preston expanded the Marine Corps to include 100,000 soldiers from dozens of species. He drilled them endlessly in urban combat and guerrilla warfare. He taught them how to fight dirty and win ugly. His Marines would be the ones landing on hostile worlds and taking ground meter by meter. Preston made sure they were ready for that burden. He remembered too well what happened to unprepared soldiers. Dr. Lisa Palmer worked on a different kind of preparation. She studied the Torath survivors and analyzed what little data they had on the Devourers. What she found was disturbing. The Devourers were not biological like the Velcrin. They were something else entirely. Ancient machines that consumed matter and energy to reproduce. They could not be reasoned with or reprogrammed. They could only be destroyed. Palmer developed new weapons based on her findings: electromagnetic pulse devices that could disable the machines, fusion bombs that could destroy them at the molecular level, chemical agents that could corrode their armor. She gave the coalition military an arsenal specifically designed to fight this new enemy. But she also gave them a warning. These machines had destroyed civilizations far more advanced than the coalition. Winning would require everything they had and more. Admiral Victoria Hayes, who everyone thought had died in the last war, sent a message from deep space. She had survived the destruction of her flagship and spent 5 years exploring the frontier. She had found evidence of the Devourers and confirmed the Torath story. They were real and they were coming. Hayes estimated they would reach coalition space in 2 years. Maybe less if they moved faster than projected. Jake Morrison received new orders. Take the Rapid Response Fleet and meet Admiral Hayes at the frontier. Establish forward observation posts and gather intelligence on the enemy. It was a dangerous assignment that might turn into the opening battle of a new war. Jake assembled his fleet of 30 ships, all of them crewed by veterans of the Velcrin War. They jumped to the frontier and found Hayes waiting with her battered scout ship. Hayes looked older than Jake remembered. 5 years of lonely exploration had worn her down, but her eyes still held that same fierce determination. She briefed Jake on everything she had learned. The Devourers traveled in massive spheres containing billions of individual machines. They moved from galaxy to galaxy, consuming everything in their path. They had no homeworld to attack and no central command to disrupt. They were a swarm without weakness. Jake listened and felt the weight of impossible odds settle on his shoulders. How do you fight an enemy with no weaknesses? How do you win against machines that outnumber you 1,000,000,000? Hayes had no good answers. She had barely survived encounters with small devourer scout groups. A full sphere would be unstoppable by conventional means. The forward observation post detected the devourers 3 months later. A sphere the size of a small moon appeared at the edge of sensor range. It was moving toward Coalition space at sublight speed. Jake's fleet fell back and shadowed it from a safe distance. They watched the sphere consume an uninhabited system, stripping planets down to their cores in days. The efficiency was terrifying. Jake sent hourly reports back to Earth. General Carter coordinated the galaxy-wide response. Every Coalition world began evacuation drills. Every fleet moved to defensive positions. Every factory converted to war production. The galaxy was mobilizing faster than it had during the Velkrin War because this time they knew what failure looked like. Ambassador Price addressed the people of Earth in a transmission that was broadcast across the galaxy. We face another threat, another test of our will to survive. But we are not the same species that faced the Velkrin 5 years ago. We are harder now, stronger. We know what must be done and we will do it. The Devourers are coming, but they will find us ready. They will find us armed. They will find us relentless. The Coalition's new rapid response fleet assembled at a rally point near human space. 300 ships crewed by the best officers from every species. They had trained together for 5 years using human tactical doctrine. They were ready to fight in ways the old Coalition military never could have imagined. Jake Morrison was given overall command with Admiral Hayes as his second. It was a massive responsibility, but both of them had proven they could handle it. Dr. Palmer arrived with her new weapons and supervised their installation on the fleet. The ships were now equipped with electromagnetic pulse cannons and fusion torpedo launchers. Every vessel carried chemical payloads designed to corrode machine armor. It was an experimental arsenal, but it was the best chance they had. Palmer briefed the fleet commanders on how to deploy the weapons effectively. She did not sugarcoat the odds. They were bad, but not impossible. Commander Grant led a team of operators on a suicide mission to infiltrate the Devourer sphere. They used stealth technology and extreme caution to slip inside the massive structure. What they found shocked them. The sphere was not solid. It was a network of machines held together by magnetic fields. There were gaps and weaknesses. The sphere could be penetrated from inside if you were willing to accept the risk. Grant's team planted experimental devices throughout the sphere's interior structure. Bombs designed to disrupt the magnetic containment. If they all detonated simultaneously, the sphere would tear itself apart. Getting the team out alive was another problem. Grant lost 4 operators during the extraction, but the survivors made it back with crucial intelligence. The sphere could be destroyed, but it would take everything the Coalition had. General Carter developed a plan called Operation Final Stand. The Coalition fleet would engage the sphere at maximum range and draw its attention. While the Devourers focused on the fleet, small teams would infiltrate the sphere and plant bombs at key points. When everyone was clear, they would detonate.